Jess Infante, the Brewbound reporter. I am home at my condo in Salem, Massachusetts, and I'm connected with Michelle McGrath, the executive director of the American Cider Association, who is at her home in Portland, Oregon. And we are going to talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the cider industry, which has some of the same things that we're seeing in beer, but some of them are different. So, hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm hanging in there, Jess. How are you doing?
Also hanging in there as
Yeah.
best we all can. So, um, let's just get right to it. So, what are you hearing from members? How is the coronavirus pandemic affecting cideries of different sizes?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jess. Obviously, we've seen changes in folks' channel mixes. So, if people were relying heavily on sales directly from their tasting room or their tap rooms, most of those tasting rooms or tap rooms have been closed and they're having to figure out how to make up those sales. There's also, the potential for decrease in keg sales or off premise now, but how it's panned out is that there's been an uptick in off premise sales as people are stocking for quarantine lifestyle. And we've seen this reflected both in chains and retails, which Nielsen has presented for cider. There was definitely an increase. It was around 22%, I think, for the stock up week. Which, I think beer was around 13, wine was around 28, spirits were around 28. So it was up there. It was, and that helped folks that were producing cans. The distributors were placing orders to meet those demands. So that was useful income up front. Additionally, cideries have been getting very creative, as many alcohol producers have, with alternative means of getting their product to customers in a quarantine world. We've seen some really fascinating stories with pop-up drive-through cideries. Farmhouse in Michigan had a pop-up drive-through cidery, and it was not only a good day for them, it was their best day ever.
Wow.
And it allowed them to keep their staff on for the rest of the month. So they were able to cover payroll for the month with one stock up drive-through market in Grand Rapids. So that was really cool from Farmhouse Cidery. Buskey in Virginia and Nine Pin in New York and Western in Montana. These are all folks that are doing direct-to-consumer deliveries and having a lot of success with it. Reverend Nats in Portland has had to hire 5 drivers to meet the demand. So
Wow.
it's definitely, I think it's surprising people. I mean, I don't know why we didn't know that alcohol delivery was going to be incredibly popular, but turns out it is, especially during a time of pandemic. So it's been really successful. Also, we're seeing some direct to consumer keg sales, which has been really neat. And yeah, so people are getting pretty creative, whether it's curbside or delivery or direct to consumer shipping in state. There's just various mechanisms for filling those gaps.
It's great to see everybody being really resourceful. So it's good for them. That's great. I know one thing that you and I had talked about earlier this winter during CiderCon was how there's a split. So there's like some really big national producers and their sales back then. I mean, obviously the world is completely different now, but their sales
Yeah.
were a little bit slower. And the smaller, like local and regional cideries, like a bunch of the ones that you just told us about, were seeing really great success. So has that dynamic changed at all?
Yeah. So there's an interesting thing about that dynamic is that it's not necessarily large versus small. It's is the cidery owned by a beer company? That tends to be the better line in the sand. So I know that Bold Rock had a significant increase in their sales for March. I think some of the other, which are, Bold Rock is a regional brand, but it's the second largest cidery in the country. So there's just an interesting kind of dynamic when you're talking about large versus small. Two Towns is, I think, the fourth largest cidery in the country. They did well in March too. So I think but Two Towns is also delivering locally, and Bold Rock is also getting in on this because they have some really amazing on-premise facilities in North Carolina and Virginia, and they were doing family taco kits to go.
Oh,
So you could go in and they had all the ingredients prepped for you, and you got your 6-pack of cider, and then you went home and you had a taco party for your family. So even the large cideries are doing deliveries and curbside and getting creative with how to get their product to consumers, if anything, to keep their brand in people's minds during this time.
right.
So,
I know that's at least, I had before all of this started was working on a story about how e-commerce is affecting beer, and pretty sure
yeah.
every bit of research I did is out the window now because everything is different.
Yeah.
But one thing that we were finding was that larger, well-known brand names do a little bit better in the e-commerce space because,
Interesting.
consumers aren't going to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll to find a tiny local producer. If you're just, placing an order and you want to show up as soon as possible, you're just going to go with something right off the top of your head. But you've mentioned that these local cideries are using their own drivers and to make these deliveries locally. Are any of them using platforms like Drizzly or anything like that? Is that success that you've been hearing?
Yeah. So because cider is sold as wine, it tends to use wine specific platforms just from a regulation perspective. And Jess, you and I have talked a little bit about how cider regulations vary hugely from state to state. In some states, they're actually, the policies cover them as a malt beverage, even though they're not a malt beverage, but that's what category they're under. And in some states, they're wine. But for the most part, the wine platforms fit cider's needs. So you may see some cider on Drizzly or Tevor or things like that. But for the most part, you're going to see them on wine-specific platforms. And Vino Shipper is the most popular one right now. And about a year ago, Vino Shipper was looking at their client list and they went, my goodness, we have a lot of cideries.
Wow.
And they threw up a store. So if you go to shopciders.com, you can find all of the cideries that are using Vino Shipper on that website, and there's quite the selection. It's pretty impressive. And they've just added a delivery component to Vino Shipper. They pivoted and put it out in like a week.
Wow.
So I think and their numbers for sales for March, from the graph, it looked like it was 4 or 5 times the amount of commerce for cider through Vino Shippers for the month of March. So I think that platform, we are trying to do what we can to get the word out about it because my husband all the time, he's like a Tevor addict, and he's, why doesn't cider have something like that? And I'm like, well, the closest we've got right now is vinoshippers.com, and folks should check it out. So.
And what are you hearing from members who use the platform?
Yeah, their sales are increasing, and they're also, a lot of our members are getting really creative with bundles. So, for example, a cidery in Virginia called Albemarle, they are doing a parallel virtual tasting today, but they promoted the bundle, which is 2 bottles. So they got me to buy 2 bottles instead of 1 2 weeks ago. And now I'll have the product available to enjoy during the virtual happy hour, the virtual meet the maker parallel tasting. It's really cool.
That is very cool. I mean, are you seeing a lot of those happening?
A lot. Yeah.
But what do you think the benefits are to those events?
I mean, what we're hearing, well, it's interesting because we're hearing from both the folks that are doing delivery and I think some of the folks that are doing virtual tastings is that people who barely knew what cider was or barely knew the brand beforehand are somehow finding these opportunities and are getting introduced to the brand for the first time. So it's not just brand loyalists or cider loyalists. It's people that are just seeing on Instagram, what? I can get cider delivered, or on Facebook, what? Virtual happy hour? I'm bored. I've been in my house for 2 weeks. That sounds fun. And there's a company out of San Francisco that specializes in craft alcohol marketing called the Crafty Cask. And they were saying that they did one of their first virtual happy hours, and the click-through rate for purchasing was 20%. I mean, that's
Wow.
pretty good. And so
That
those were
seems really
folks
high.
that didn't have the alcohol, didn't have the alcohol that was being discussed in the virtual tasting with them. And so then they posted the link, and they, 20% posted the link or clicked
What
on
would
the
you
link.
think is the ideal lead time to promote the event, like in order to give people enough time and space to get the products that are tasted through?
It's going to vary based on the cidery. It could probably be done in 2 weeks. That's what Albemarle did.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that at least we're seeing on the beer side is that a few of the laws that have been in place are getting loosened a little bit. I think that states seeing the benefit of making it so like our, craft beverage producers can make it through and stay afloat and stay in business after all of
Yeah.
this. So one thing that really started, I think, probably 2 weeks ago was New York, New Jersey, Connecticut started allowing restaurants who are close to on-premise dining to offer beer and wine, in some cases spirits, to go with their takeout
Yeah.
orders. So it's been really interesting to see that. I know a lot of states have now adopted the same policy. Massachusetts is working on it. But do you think that we're going to see a few of these laws being loosened? I know that cider has a lot of different laws than beer does. So have you seen any examples like that are benefiting cider makers?
Yeah, absolutely. So New York is the first example. When I think New York comes to mind first because in New York, the in-state shipping laws excluded specifically cider.
That's rude.
Right. That's rude. That's a great response. And it actually happens a lot. And it happens, it's an unintended consequence of the wine industry being specific about their laws. And it's not anything, personal against cider. It's just that if you're very specific about wine laws, even though cider is apple wine, it can sometimes exclude cider.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what was happening in New York. And the New York Cider Association had actually been trying to pass a bill for a while to get cider in-state shipping legalized. And there was an executive order by the governor to make a temporary allowance for it. So thankfully, folks are now shipping in-state in New York due to that specific cider ruling being changed.
And that just happened just now?
Yep. That happened about 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So New York Cider Association was all over that. And I have to give a shout out. I've never done this before, but I have to give a shout out to New York State Liquor Authority. You were at CiderCon, so we give awards every year. And I'm starting to think that we need to give liquor control boards awards because the amount of time that I have to spend explaining what cider is to liquor control boards is sometimes pretty shocking. And New York State Liquor Authority not only totally is understanding of cider's industry-specific needs, but their director came on to the New York Cider Association webinar to answer any questions.
Wow.
I can't imagine that happening in any other state.
That's so helpful.
So
how many cideries
are
about are in New York?
100-ish.
That's a lot.
Yeah, or more.
Seems like a lot to me, at least.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's there's somewhere around 1,000 cideries in the United States, which for comparison, there's I think around 1,800 independent distilleries. So
and about 8,000 breweries.
And about 8,000 breweries. Yeah. So
yeah, New York's been really helpful. I've been stalking. I've spent a lot of time now on state and government websites.
Yeah,
and
me too.
New York's been so clear about everything. The New York Brewers Association, Paul Leone, their director, is doing an awesome job. I was thinking that Brewbound does awards too every year at our annual Brewbound Live event.
Oh, great!
Suggesting to Justin, I think we need to give them an award. So
yeah.
Now that I've let the cat out of the bag on that, yeah, it's been great to see.
The clarity is a really big deal for cider because so many state liquor pages don't use the word cider anywhere. And you have to dive into the code to find out which category it falls under. And like, there was a Western state that I won't name, but there was a Western state where the language was just not clear. And it was so unclear that cideries thought they weren't allowed to ship their product in state. And about 20 emails back and forth,
Wow.
we were able to figure out that, yes, they can ship their cider in state, and now they are. So,
I mean, at times like these, like I think just being as clear and as transparent as possible is really necessary to make everybody, know what they can do, what they can't do, and how they're going to make it by. So
yeah.
it's
And
nice
I
to see
think
states like New York.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, cider is huge in New York, so
Right.
it makes sense that they
That
would be
helps.
embracing of it. Cider's also really big in Oregon, and the OLCC is using the word cider when they say wine, beer, and cider, which is helpful because just lumping it under wine just confuses folks.
For sure. Absolutely. So one thing that, I know brewers kind of have on their minds now is all of the kegs that have gone out to all of these on-premise accounts
Yeah.
that are now not being poured. They're just sitting in coolers. What becomes of them and what happens. So is this a concern that cider makers are feeling too?
It's a little bit of a less concern for cider because whereas a beer keg is, best consumed fresh,
Mhm.
cider can stay in a keg for a lot longer.
Wow.
So it, sometimes people put expiration dates on cider, but it can be in the keg or the can for a lot longer than most people think. So hopefully that means that people will be able to hold on to those kegs throughout the pandemic quarantine time.
Good. It's good to hear. I mean, have you heard of any other creative methods that cider makers are, we've seen the taco kits, curbside, drive-throughs.
Yeah.
Is that kind of nationwide for cider makers?
Yeah, I think nationwide we're seeing, Virginia is where we're seeing a lot of the direct to consumer sales. It's starting to pick up in the Northwest. There's definitely some lack of clarity on the rules. California, I think, are doing deliveries as well. So I think everywhere this has been. There's also some folks that I think it's important to mention are actively choosing not to do deliveries because they are trying to push their normal customers to support the local bottle shops who are also going to need support during this time. And there's definitely concern about distributor relationships with this
Right.
huge uptick. And so I think rightfully so, some people are being very cautious about, how do we go about these direct to consumer sales in a way that's respectful of our distributor relationship.
That makes a lot of
So.
sense. Have you spoken to any distributors about what they're seeing and feeling right now?
I haven't had a chance yet. My third party information is that they're seeing a huge demand for cans. So,
And then the last time we spoke, I know cans were kind of a hot topic because
Yeah.
some cider makers, we're trying to stay away from them and some prefer the more traditional bottle formats. Are you seeing any shift in that area?
I'm not seeing that for the folks that are using bottles because they're able to meet their needs by asking their club members to buy more. And that will make up for their restaurant sales. Restaurant sales are a big problem for that category of cider.
Right.
Because they're selling a lot and so by asking their club to step up and buy more, they've been able to make up some of that lost revenue from the restaurants. But there are a lot of cideries that are just so small, they only make cider in a keg. They
Wow.
don't have any packaging option. And
Wow.
it's going to be tough for those folks.
So what do they do now? Do they turn to mobile canning? Do they pivot to package?
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody releasing cans for the first time, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happens soon.
Right.
I recommended to one of the regional associations that maybe they look into buying a crowler machine because that's something that the folks that are using only kegs could maybe rotate and share since that's not for a super small cidery, it's not a drop in the bucket piece of equipment. So it'll be interesting to see. And also, some of the loosened off-premise sales regulations are pretty forgiving about growlers and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if people start investing in those resources for the first time. It'll be interesting to see.
Makes a lot of sense. I spoke to a growler producer and a decorator a couple of days ago who told me that he was getting lots of calls from restaurants.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I know the bill that's working its way through the legislature here in Massachusetts would allow, I think, for restaurants to be able to pour beer into growlers. So it's definitely something to do to not let all those kegs go to waste. So
yeah. Hopefully it allows cider too. You never know, but
I think I'd assume so.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, anything else you're hearing from members?
Just that they are feeling the love from consumers. And I think that says a lot about the cider consumer base. There've been some pretty amazing grassroots efforts to try and drive online sales of cideries to support them. I call them cash mobs. The grassroots cider community, the drinkers, they're pretty special people. And we're definitely like companies and the association. The Cider Association has seen a huge uptick in enthusiast members in the last couple of weeks.
Interesting.
Because they realize that our revenue membership is, cideries are hurting. So they're going to be less likely to be able to pay membership. And so enthusiast members are joining. And we are so excited about this. We're actually probably going to start creating some specific benefits for that group.
What are the current benefits for enthusiast members?
The current benefits for enthusiast members are pretty small because our benefits are designed to meet the needs of cideries and allied trade members. So right now they get access to attend CiderCon. If they want to buy a ticket to CiderCon, we say, okay. We're working with some of the, chief enthusiasts, some of the leaders in the enthusiast community to dream up some creative benefits, which would include things like exclusive content.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
How much is a membership?
It's only $75.
So,
yeah.
Hey, I mean, if you're an enthusiast, it's a great way to show support.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I know the cider community is very special. I definitely saw that at CiderCon. So
yeah,
nice to hear they're stepping up for you guys.
Yeah, no, it's been great. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Anything else you think we need to touch on?
Just that I think there's a lot of people getting creative with cider cocktails right now with super basic ingredients. And
I hadn't even thought about cider cocktails. That makes a lot of sense. While you're home.
Exactly. So in my house right now, I don't drink a ton of spirits. I love spirits, but I just don't drink a ton of them. So I've got a bottle of vodka and a bottle of mezcal. And I randomly found a bottle of club soda. I think it's left over from Thanksgiving when I was making cocktails. I'm not sure. And then I was getting cider delivered to my doorstep. So I made a cider mezcal cocktail yesterday for a virtual happy hour out of 3 ingredients. It was delicious. Yeah.
Nice. I know cider has a lot of ties to the culinary world. So, and I feel like everybody's at home cooking because at least that's what I'm doing. So
yeah. And I think that's where the meal kits are coming. And I know there's some people coming out with online cider cocktail classes specifically tailored to quarantine time. So yeah, it's been pretty interesting.
Great. That's really interesting. I'll have to keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I hope you stay safe and enjoy your extra time at home with the little ones.
Thank you.